2.5 years. He joined Toastmasters along with his sweetie, Kathy, our president, because they wanted to bring more inspiration into their so-called humdrum lives. Humdrum? Really? He is a self-proclaimed roving garage sale reporter on KPCW's classified show and the co-host of the Sunday storytelling program, The Story Mine, on the same radio station. He recently gave a breakout presentation along with his sweetheart Kathy at the Toastmasters District 15 conference this weekend in Ogden. And apparently it was a real hit. This was titled, How to Develop and Perform Your Own Tall Tale. The presentation was a hit as Kathy and he are both professional tall tale tellers. Today's presentation is a Halloween special, patterned after the entertaining speaker manual's The Dramatic Talk. His objectives in this speech are to develop an entertaining dramatic speech about an experience or incident, include vivid imagery, characters, and dialogue, and to deliver the talk in an entertaining manner. Because of the holiday special spooky nature of this Halloween presentation, the time limit will be 10 to 12 minutes, Mr. Timer. And he warns you that this is no tall tale, but a true story titled Owl Woman. Would you please bring your hands together and welcome David.
Good morning. In 1982, I was the chief construction engineer on the construction of the Deseret Generation and Transmission Power Plant, the Bonanza Power Plant. It was boom time in northeastern Utah. It was almost impossible to find a place to live. And if you did, it cost a fortune for a bed for the night. For some reason, I was lucky enough to find an entire brand new house that sat on top of a beautiful hill in Ashley Valley, looked out over the entire valley. And this house was the only one in the neighborhood. I was so excited when I went to work. I told my work companions about this house, and one of them, a Native American Ore Indian, came up to me afterward and he said, David, do not move into this house. It sits on an ancient Indian burial ground and the land is cursed, and you will forever be changed if you live there. Curse? I don't believe in curses. Not going to happen. It's the only place available. It's inexpensive, and I'm moving in. From the very first day that I moved into that beautiful house with the most gorgeous view, weird things happen. If I was in the living room, I would hear doors open and close in the bedrooms. I would hear footsteps going across the rooms in the bedrooms. So I would go into the bedrooms and I'd look and I wouldn't find anything out of order. There would be nobody there. But if I was in the bedroom, I would hear footsteps in the living room or going up and down the stairs from the entry. I was about to defeat this. I would run in, but there would be nobody there. What a joke this was for me. I chalked it all up to the house was settling. After all, I'm a structural engineer. I'm a civil engineer. I'm a construction engineer. I understand these kind of things. The house is just settling. He said, David, do not move into this house because the land is cursed. I said, what makes you think the land is cursed? He says, sit down. I have a story. So I sat down and he told me that several hundred years ago, there was a woman, an old, wrinkled woman by the name of Owl Woman. She was a medicine woman for the Ore Indian tribe. The Spaniards had come through and they discovered gold and silver in a place that they called Miner's Basin. They enslaved a village of Indians and they forced them to work in the mines, digging out the gold and silver. These Indians did all of their bidding. Their cooking, their cleaning, their mining. These Indians made them rich. Owl Woman had heard that there was a detachment of relief soldiers, a battalion that was coming from Mexico, and that they would relieve the soldiers that had been there for many years. And so Owl Woman knew that she had to do something because they disrespected the Indians so badly. There was an open pit, and if an Indian were to pass away, to die for any reason whatsoever, the Spaniards would disrespectfully toss the body into an open pit. And if the wind would blow out of the southwest, the village would be covered with the scent of rotting flesh, reminding the Indians of what could happen to them if they disrespected or didn't obey their captors. And so Owl Woman stole out of the village, and she walked for over 150 miles to where a strong band of Indian warriors lived in what is now called Spring Lake, Utah. Dragging her feet into camp because of her exhaustion, she was accepted and she worked with the warriors and came up with a plan that she might and they might defeat these warriors. They did defeat their captors. They did overcome their slavery. It was a great, great accomplishment for Owl Woman. And her last duty was to make sure that this open pit was covered and that all of her people that had passed away were buried respectfully. In the last moment, she took a bone knife and she went to this covered sacred burial ground. And she cursed the land that no man would tarry long upon that land. And then she took the bone knife and stabbed it into her heart, spilling her blood on the soil, sealing the curse. That was a great story. I love that story, but I just don't believe in legends. And I was desperate for a place to live. So I rented that brand new, beautiful house that was up on top of a hill. But from that first day, footsteps could be heard. From that first day, there would be strange things happening, but I ignored them, chalking it all up to settlement of the foundation. Well, I invited all my friends over for Super Bowl Sunday. I had barbecued ribs, I had barbecued chicken, I had potato salad, I had chips and dip, I had plenty of libations. Woo-hoo! We were going to have the best time. And while we were cheering on our team, watching the game on my brand new 36-inch color TV, there was a tremendous noise that came from the kitchen. And we turned right there and witnessed all of the contents of the cupboards being thrust out onto the floor. Pots and pans and dishes shattering were swirling around on the floor. And then, as though there was an explosion, the fridge burst open and all the contents of the fridge were cast out across the room and onto the floor. My friends were so terrified at what had happened, they struggled against each other to be the first ones out of the front door and down the street in their cars, leaving me alone and frightened. I cleaned up the mess. It took forever. I went to bed fully clothed, and I pulled the covers up, and I lay there wondering if I should leave, if I should just abandon the house, because I didn't quite understand what had happened that day. And that's when I heard it. There was a noise out in the living room, right at the beginning of the plastic runner that I had laid out in the hallway to protect the carpet from my muddy boots. It was a corrugated plastic runner, and I heard the scraping of feet coming down the plastic runner. Well, as though that weren't bad enough, I also heard the sound of an old Native American Indian woman going, "Eyateneha etakahaka, eyateneha etakanaha, hayatanaka." And I was laying in my bed going, what is happening? And I pulled the cover up to my eyes, and I laid in the bed, and I was hearing this feet scraping on the plastic runner. And she was cursing at me in her language, and she was coming down the plastic runner, getting ever so much closer to my open bedroom door. And I laid there, and I finally knew what it was like to be scared stiff. And as she came closer and closer, repeating those words, I didn't know what to do. I reached for the light that was on the bedside table. And the day before, I had moved it all the way over to the other side of my double bed. And I couldn't reach the light. I couldn't turn it on. I was just frozen in fear. And I didn't know what to do. And as she stepped off of the plastic runner into the threshold of my doorway, I couldn't take it anymore. I thrust myself up, and I put my feet over the side of the bed. I laid them on the floor, and I covered my head, and I said, "Ah!" I stayed there for the longest time, waiting for the bone dagger to come into my back. I waited for my throat to be cut. I waited to die. There was the most sickening stench that penetrated my nostrils of rotting flesh. And then, gradually, the stink went away. I stood on wobbly legs, and I reached towards the light in the closet, and I grabbed the switch, and I knew if I turned the light on, she would be right there. It would be awful. But I flipped the light on, and there was no one there. The room was empty. Oh, I knew she was under the bed. So I looked on the floor, and there on the floor was a feather. An owl feather. And I picked it up, and I realized what had happened to me, and I ran out of the room. I ran out to my car. Thank God I'd left the keys in the ignition, and I started up my truck, and I sped out of the driveway and down the road, never, ever to return to that house again.